Road near Two Notch Road, also Highway 1 at Pisgah Church, you find an accident. I-20 westbound at Two Notch Road, also an accident there. Looks like Smyrna Road near Ashley Creek Drive in Elgin is an issue, and in Lexington, Old Chapin at Old Cherokee. Once the kind of misty conditions head out of here, we'll have a high today of 79. Storms tomorrow, windy conditions, looking for high of 76. Windy on Friday, but the storms will be gone, and we'll have sunny skies really to take us through Monday. Could top out at 84 by Sunday. But right now, 61 on 107.5, The Game.
Nine o'clock on your Wednesday morning. Welcome in. It is the Extra Point here on The Game. Tyler Head along with you. Ed Bird on the other side of the glass as we gave Dave his obligatory days off for this week as he works so hard for us. He'll be back in a little bit later on in the week. Always appreciate Ed Bird stepping in and hanging out for a couple days. Looking up the TV at, I guess this is the NBC Golf Channel, showing the pristine course that is Augusta National. As Masters Week rolls on, had some of the practice rounds going on the other day. Par 3 coming up today. I was just looking at the weather. It's going to be an absolutely beautiful weekend, not only here in Columbia, but also out there in Augusta for what should be a fantastic Masters weekend. Looking forward to that, and certainly going to dive into that as the week goes along here. Baseball, also big series coming up this weekend as they head on the road, taking on the Florida Gators. They first had to get past their midweek challenge last night, that being the North Carolina Tar Heels up the road in Charlotte at Truist Field, where the Charlotte Knights play. And I'll be honest with you, I thought this was setting up to be another letdown for South Carolina. It's been a rough go of it, to say the least, over the course of these past couple of weeks, particularly when you talk about the weekend series, but also the midweeks haven't exactly gone the way South Carolina would want them. You gave up a ton of runs to Upstate the other week. Got blanked by Georgia Southern for the first time this season last Tuesday. And then coming off of another series where you dropped 2 out of 3 against Texas A&M at home of all places. You go into taking on a top 15 ranked North Carolina team in a midweek on a week where you're going to be traveling here in a couple days to Florida. I thought this set up as a classic type of letdown type of game for the Gamecocks, and give credit where it's due. They ended up surprising me. They actually were able to pull out the win last night and do it in gritty, kind of grinded out fashion. 2-1 victory over what is legitimately one of the best hitting, specifically when you talk about power hitting teams in all of the ACC. So to hold a team like that at bay to just 1 run, which ties their lowest total of the entire season, is pretty darn impressive. You had Dylan Eskew out there, his first start since he had kind of a rough outing against Bama a couple weeks ago. Had been coming out of the bullpen since then, but goes out there, throws a solid couple of innings, 4 hits, no runs. And then the bullpen ends up coming in very, very clutch for the last couple of innings of that game, which is something that's kind of become, something that South Carolina's been able to hang their hat on a little bit this season. There's been times when the bullpen's been rough, but this past weekend against Texas A&M specifically, you actually had a pretty good outing from your bullpen, where you look at Eli Jones and and Tyler Pitzer giving up, a lot in their innings of starting work, but the bullpen coming in the last couple of innings of those games on Friday and Saturday and being able to lock things down. Unfortunately for South Carolina, not able to pick up a victory on either one of those days. And as has kind of become the norm for South Carolina, you're able to get that getaway game on Sunday to avoid getting swept, which is good. And, you know, those wins do account for something at the end of the day when you're talking about your overall SEC totals, but you hate to continue dropping series the way that South Carolina has these past couple weeks. In reference to that starting pitching, I didn't get a chance to get to this yesterday, but Coach Kingston on Monday when he was on with Jay and Elijah actually dove in a little bit to the starting pitching and its performance from this past weekend against Texas A&M. Let's hear what Coach Kingston had to say.
Well, you had Eli Jones, who had been pretty darn consistent all year and had given us really good starts all year. And you combine the fact that at some point, you know, guys just not going to be on top of his game or be at his best. And then you marry that with one of the best offenses in the country. And on a given night, it just may not be his night. And it wasn't. And I would say about the same for Pitzer on Saturday. Now, Pitzer is a young guy still trying to develop his third pitch, and that third pitch is a changeup, and that's how righties generally keep left-handed hitters off balance. And so sometimes, you know, in prize fights, they say it all the time, styles make fights. And sometimes it's just not a good matchup for your pitcher versus their hitters or vice versa. And with them being very heavily left-handed in their lineup, it was a tough matchup for Pitzer, where against Vanderbilt, they were mostly right-handed, and Pitzer could go fastball slider, and it was a great matchup for our side. So the game is like that a lot of times. You know, the matchups can determine who has the success, and you just need to continue to evaluate and try to put guys in situations where they have their best chance for success.
And again, for the most part, you know, starting pitching, particularly when you look at a guy like Eli Jones, has been pretty good. Now, Jones does give up a fair amount of hits, but he's done a pretty good job for the most part of mitigating the damage as far as runs scored. This past weekend against Texas A&M was not the case there. And Pitzer, who, you know, had shown in his opportunities that allowed him to work himself into this, you know, weekend rotation, you know, also a little bit rough, giving up 4 hits and 4 runs in his start on, you know, on Saturday. And that's something that, you know, you hope can settle down a little bit, especially as you go into these next couple of weekend series, which are going to be of vital importance to South Carolina. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday when we were out at, you know, Pro Swing, Wes, Chris, and myself, which, by the way, shout out to everybody over at Pro Swing and Integrated Media for allowing us to be out there. Very cool place that certainly going to have to go back to, and certainly enjoyed hanging out there yesterday. But these next couple of weekend series, you can't win the SEC in the middle of April, but you can certainly lose the SEC in the middle of April. And what I mean is South Carolina right now sitting at 6-6 in conference play. It's not awful. You're right there in the middle tier of the SEC. But if these next couple weekends go sideways, they continue to go the way these past couple of weekends go, you're going to be in a tough spot. Now, yes, there's always that opportunity that you can put together a great run in the SEC tournament and roll that through to you know, to success in the NCAA tournament as well. But if you are, you know, come away from these next couple of series only winning 1 game apiece, you know, between Florida and then Arkansas and Kentucky, which, by the way, Arkansas and Kentucky are legitimately the top 2 teams in the SEC as of right now. If you come away only winning 1 game out of those series and come away from that, you know, 3-6, where suddenly your conference record is now 9-12 and you're under 500, then you start getting into that territory of, man, you just got to make sure that you're doing what you can to get into the SEC tournament, because of course the bottom 2 teams in the league standings don't get to play. So again, you can't win the SEC over these next couple weeks, but you could certainly put yourself in a tough position to potentially derail your season if these next couple of series don't go well. And again, South Carolina has shown the ability to beat good teams. They swept Vanderbilt the other weekend. Like, that is not a fluke, or it shouldn't be looked at as a fluke. And you have the pieces and the skills and abilities on this team to play that great caliber of baseball week in and week out. Unfortunately, it just hasn't, been put together as consistently as you'd want for South Carolina. And I keep going back to this quite a bit in reference to the errors that South Carolina is making. And they're popping up every single game. Had another one last night with, Lee Croy at third base. And look, errors are a part of baseball, but unfortunately, South Carolina is committing them at quite a high clip this season. One of the worst in the SEC in that regard. And again, when you talk about a lot of these series, that are coming down to these tight games, 1, 2, 3 runs, those errors begin to add up. And I'm not saying that South Carolina needs to be an error-free team. That's certainly what you hope for, but that's a little lofty of an expectation when you talk about baseball, because those kind of things do happen. But, if you're talking about South Carolina cutting some of those errors, and some of them don't even show up in the stat sheet. I go back to the series against Texas A&M, and it was in game no. 1. You had several mistakes that happened in that game that, didn't necessarily show up as errors on the stat sheet, but as far as the eye test can be seen in the same light as errors. So if you cut half those things out, you probably have another handful of wins, to add to your resume so far this season. And again, those kind of things add up as the year goes along, and hopefully things can go well, in regards to these next couple series. You're going on the road to Florida, which, again, is where your season came to an end last year in the Super Regional. Now, Florida has been on a little bit of a skid these past couple games. They've dropped their last 4, including a 15-run loss to Florida State last night in their rivalry series. But before that, they won all of their series against the likes of A&M, who South Carolina's lost to, against Mississippi State, and on the road in Baton Rouge, which we know is never, ever an easy place to play. So this is a good Florida team. Their record might fool you a little bit in terms of overall in conference play, but that's a team that's very capable of beating South Carolina this weekend, and we'll dive into that matchup more a little bit as the week goes along. But it's not going to be an easy task going down to Gainesville this weekend. And as I mentioned, after that, you've got the combination of Arkansas and Kentucky in back-to-back weekend series, who, by the way, are a combined 11-2 in conference play right now. So got to be playing your best baseball over these next couple weeks to put yourself in good position as you get closer to the end of the regular season. Not to mention the fact you got daunting task with Georgia and Tennessee coming down the road as well. Two of the best offenses in all the SEC that you're going to have to take on, and certainly don't want to have any pitching issues when that weekend series rolls around. And, of course, every weekend in the SEC is tough because just about every team in the SEC is going to be really tough and really, really good. But South Carolina maybe not playing up to the standards that they're capable of with the talent that they have on this team. And hopefully that can be corrected as we get into these next couple of weeks. Want to remind you, as always, you can check us out on the Game TV, sponsored by our friends at Shepherd's Glass. Go to youtube.com, search the Game TV, watch it all day long. You can also listen to us on the 107.5 The Game app. Just go to the App Store, Google Play Store, or the iTunes Store. Give us a download and listen to us wherever you go. We are still, of course, celebrating the women's team winning the national championship on Sunday with that victory over Iowa as they secured the 10th team in the history of women's college basketball to win a national championship as an undefeated team, and joined a very exclusive list of a lot of great UConn teams, Tennessee, and some programs, Baylor as well, some great programs in the history of women's college basketball. But where do they rank in that history? One writer with ESPN put them on the list at a pretty low spot. We'll dive into that and why they're there and how they could potentially climb as the years go by. Coming up, it is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you, Ed Bird producing on the other side of the glass on your Wednesday morning here on The Game. Oh, as always, I love telling you about our friends over at Twin Peaks. I mentioned a little bit earlier, lot of great golf going on this weekend over in Augusta, watching some of the practice stuff going on as of right now, and I can't think of a better place if you can't make it to Augusta to take in golf's first major than with our friends over at Twin Peaks. It's going to be wall-to-wall TVs as far as the eye can see at every single angle. They're also going to be featuring a new menu edition, the Tito's Transfusion, for just $8 all day long. You can catch all the great golf action this upcoming weekend out at Twin Peaks. And, of course, nobody does happy hour quite like Twin Peaks with the amazing extensive category of whiskey and bourbon cocktails, as well as those 29-degree man-sized draft beers. Get out Twin Peaks this weekend down in the Vista. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday morning. Of course, Ed Bird producing on the other side of the glass for us today. I just talked about baseball there. Another reminder, As always, you can register on 1075thegame.com for the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway each and every week, as $25 gets added to the pot each and every game until we see a Gamecock hitter blast a Grand Slam. Unfortunately, none happened last night in South Carolina's 2-1 victory over the Tar Heels. So another $25 added to the pot as you head into this weekend series, go on the road to take on Florida. And again, go online to 1075thegame.com each and every week to register for your chance to win, as that pot is over $800 now, so it keeps adding up. It's getting higher and higher. Certainly hope to see that Grand Slam soon, so one of you can make all that wonderful money from our friends over Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union. I was very interested yesterday to see what the ratings were going to be for the men's national championship game. And I had a really good feeling, as most people did, that the women's game was going to eclipse it from Sunday afternoon. And when the ratings came out, well, guess what? The women's game ended up beating them by about 4 million total viewers over the course of their game. Again, just another historic note for what has been an incredible season for, women's basketball. And just the hype around that game between South Carolina and Iowa was off to the charts compared to what UConn and Purdue were. And that's no disrespect to those two programs, as they've, again, been among the two best in college basketball this season, both, being number one seeds on the respective side of the bracket. But it just wasn't a matchup that really instilled a lot of excitement. And watching that game on Monday night, it was just kind of, it was okay, but it wasn't great, and UConn ends up winning the game by 15 points, which, it almost kind of seemed like a foregone conclusion for the better part of the second half that UConn was going to win. It was just more of a matter of waiting for the clock to hit zero, as opposed to South Carolina, who did end up pulling away late in the game, against Iowa. There was still that air of, you don't know, maybe Iowa can come back, which just, to me, kind of created a far more entertaining matchup, which, again, South Carolina now made themselves the 10th team in the history of women's college basketball to end the season as an undefeated. And, one of the questions that's obviously going to get asked coming away from that game is, where does South Carolina match up with the other 9 undefeated seasons in the history of the women's game? Well, Michael Vopel of ESPN actually ranked all 10 of those undefeated women's teams over the years. And South Carolina, maybe to the surprise of some, actually comes in at number 9. The only team that they were put ahead of was the 2013-2014 UConn Huskies team, which was led by Breanna Stewart when she was there en route to that national championship. But, again, some of you may kind of look at that and say, well, why is South Carolina so low? And Michael Vopel, talked a lot about South Carolina's depth and how important it was to that team. And he also notes, at the end of this thing, that you are only losing really Camila Cardoso this offseason. So you're going to be returning a lot of talent for this team, pretty much everybody, as well as bringing in the likes of Joyce Edwards from this upcoming recruiting class for 2024 and 2025. Now, South Carolina is already projected to be the favorite to win the national championship coming up next year, and we'll see what happens when the season rolls around. We know they're going to be good, as we knew they were going to be good this year. We just didn't know how good they were going to be compared to the freshie class that was in its swan song from a season ago. And that's what's interesting about this list for me, because I think we can't truly understand the grasp of how impressive this one is from South Carolina's standpoint until we see this crop of talent finish out their college careers. And, when you look at the number one team that Vopel's put on this list, it was the 2001-2002 UConn Huskies team, which was senior laden at that point in time. Sue Bird, Swin Cash, Tamika Williams, all were in their final years of college basketball. Diana Taurasi, I guess this would have been her freshman or sophomore year. She obviously went on to be number one pick a couple seasons later, but that team was mainly led by a senior group and was kind of a definitive end to that class, capped off with the national championship, which I think holds it in a higher regard in a lot of people's minds. Similarly, if South Carolina would have won the title a season ago, being undefeated with the freshie class, had they obviously gotten past Iowa and then beaten LSU in the national championship, I really think you could have made a solid argument that that team would have been number one, just given everything that freshie class had accomplished over the course of its time here at South Carolina, and capping it off with an undefeated national championship would just kind of been the cherry on top. Obviously, that didn't end up happening, and this younger class or younger team this season ends up kind of carrying that banner and ends up being that undefeated national champion, instead. But when you look at the amount of contributors that are just either freshman or sophomore on this team, you look at Tessa Johnson, you look at Malaysia Full-Wiley, Raven Johnson, Chloe Kitts, Ashton Watkins, who still have a couple more seasons here at South Carolina. I think the scale of what they were able to do is going to only be heightened as time goes along, as we see all these girls, eventually transition into professional basketball as well. And wherever they end up going in those drafts, Camila Cardoso likely going to be a top 5 pick in next week's WNBA draft, and there's no reason to think that all of these girls, in addition to the Tina Pau-Paus, girls like that are going to be going in to their senior or final year here at South Carolina, coming up next season. I think their legacy will continue to add to what the season means, because you can look at it in a couple of years and say, okay, well, you have Raven or Chloe or Malaysia or whoever it may be going as top picks in the WNBA draft, and wrapping up their college careers, however that goes, and saying, wow, look at what they were able to do as just freshmen or sophomores. And again, I think that adds to the legacy of the class as time goes along. But regardless, to be on this list is an honor, because again, only 10 teams in the history of women's college basketball have been able to do that. So it is kind of like splitting hairs when you talk about the separations between these teams. And I don't argue with the fact that 01-02 UConn team was number one, not only with the fact that they were senior laden, but the manner in which they won games was very, very impressive. I want to hit one more note here when talking about women's basketball, because it was a pretty, not surprising, but breaking news coming out last night pretty late, that Tara Vanderveer, the head coach at Stanford, who's been there for pretty much 4 decades, has decided to retire. And she retires not only as the winningest coach in women's college basketball, but the winningest coach in all of college basketball, ahead of Gina Auriemma and Mike Krzyzewski, who she passed a while back. And for all that we've talked about of how important and huge this season's been for women's college basketball, now you're closing it out with one of the greats of the game, legitimately one of the, if not the greatest coaches in the history of in all of college basketball, calling it a career. She led Stanford to 3 national championships, most recent one back in 2021, 13 Final Four appearances, 15 Pac-12 tournament championships. They won the Pac-12 regular season seemingly every single year, and were a high seed once again in the NCAA tournament. This season, before losing to the NC State team at South Carolina, ended up facing in the Final Four. I guess that would have been in the round of 16. So that ends up being the final, the curtain call, I guess, for Tara Vanderveer, as she ultimately calls it a career. But huge loss going to be felt by the entire, college basketball community when one of the greatest coaches of all time decides to step away. But what an incredible career. Going to be remembered forever, what she's been able to do out there in Stanford. And that program will still always be in the conversation as one of the best in the country. But, and they're losing a top 5 pick in Cameron Brink, who's expected to be probably about second right after, Caitlin Clark gets picked coming up on Monday. But countless, NBA talents and WNBA talents and WNBA All-Stars, obviously the national championships, all the conference championships, just a long list of accolades for Tara Vanderveer out there in Stanford. And I think it's almost kind of fitting that as Stanford begins to transition, to going into the ACC, which is still ridiculous to think about that, Tara Vanderveer has the opportunity to kind of go out with the conference that she dominated for so many decades in the Pac-12. So amazing career. And again, that lack of presence for her is going to be felt in the college basketball world going forward. But hats off to an incredible career for Tara Vanderveer out there in Stanford. The University of Auburn, or Auburn University, I guess is the proper way to put it, their uniform is going to look a little bit different starting in 2025. Why you should care about that and how that could affect South Carolina is pretty interesting. We'll dive into that coming up. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday morning. Ed Bird producing on the other side of the glass for Captain Dave here on The Game. I advise you all the time, you should always keep an eye on what's going on with your home's foundation. I know it's something that's probably not at the top of your mind, but it's something very, very important to make sure that you are keeping tabs on, especially if you start to notice some things that are a little bit weird around your home, things like cracks in your exterior brick, cracks in walls or above windows and door frames, doors or windows that might be a little bit sticky, uneven or bouncy floors, cracks over your garage door, anything like that could be signs of serious foundation problems with your home. If you notice any of those things, you need to check out our friends over at Canty Foundation Specialist. Go online to cantyconfix.com to schedule an appointment. They will send out a professional to come evaluate your home's foundation and get you and your family fixed up just right so you can live comfortably going forward. Again, Canty Foundation Specialist, schedule an appointment online today at cantyconfixit.com. Welcome back in. It's the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on the game. Quick reminder, coming up tonight at 6 o'clock, you have Carolina Calls with Coach Marcus Kingston talking baseball as, again, we get set for another series coming up this weekend, taking on Florida on the road down there in Gainesville. Again, that first game against Florida coming up on Friday afternoon, a little bit earlier start time, 6:30. The first pitch, pregame coverage starting at 6:15, which you'll be able to listen to right here on the game. If you've listened to me on the station for any length of time, you probably are aware that I am very much interested in talking uniforms whenever those kind of conversations come up. And there was an interesting piece of news that came out yesterday morning that I think holds a lot of relevance to what goes on here at South Carolina. That news being that the University of Auburn University, however they phrase it, Auburn, has signed a new apparel deal with Nike. Now, Auburn has been a Under Armour school for the past 18 years. That deal set to end in the middle of next summer in June. Nike will take over as the apparel provider starting in July of 2025. So by the 2025 college football season, Nike or Auburn will be not rocking the Nike swooshes on their uniform as opposed to the Under Armour logo. And why did this happen? Well, it really boils down to the value of the company falling. When they signed their last deal back in 2015, Under Armour signed them to a 9-year deal worth $78.2 million in total value. And part of the arrangement was the school accepting $10 million in Under Armour stock, which would be paid out over the life of the contract. The apparel company was assuming that they would continue to grow as they were doing 10 years ago, and that the value of that $10 million will continue to increase, where that deal ends up being more lucrative for Auburn on the other side. The only problem was Under Armour's stock has continued to fall and fall and fall and fall. In fact, it's the lowest it's been in about 12 years, where it sits right now currently. So the value of that stock for Auburn is quite low. So obviously they were not getting the financial benefit that they hoped they were going to get out of being an Under Armour school. So they've decided to move on and go to Nike. And this continues a trend that we've seen over these past couple of years in reference to Under Armour as the apparel provider for several schools. And their relationships with Cal, Hawaii, Cincinnati recently, they've been sued by UCLA for the end of that contract. And that's still an ongoing legal battle. And there's only a handful of schools left still rocking Under Armour apparel, South Carolina being one of them, Maryland, Utah, Wisconsin, Texas Tech, Maryland, and, of course, Notre Dame. Now, if we go back to last fall, Notre Dame entered a negotiating period as their Under Armour contract was coming to an end, and it seemed like all indications that Under Armour was no longer going to be their apparel provider, though they did end up re-signing them for the tune of $10 million a year, which is one of the most lucrative apparel contracts in all of college sports. Now, again, that may give you the inclination that, Under Armour is still wholly committed to being a college apparel provider for a lot of schools. But again, we look at the schools they've already dropped. They haven't really re-signed anybody else with the exception of Notre Dame since then. And Notre Dame is obviously a very, very valuable asset and a very, very valuable property in college sports. And for a organization in Under Armour that doesn't have as much money as the likes of Nike seem to have at that point in time, throwing $10 million at Notre Dame a year, that's a lot. And they may not have the resources available to hold down as many schools as they have in years past, and South Carolina could be the next one. Carolina's deal with Under Armour ends in June of 2026, so a new apparel provider would theoretically be coming in July of 2026, and very similarly to Auburn, as we were over a year away from their contract ending, That means we're probably in the scope of about a year away from South Carolina entering those negotiations with Under Armour and theoretically any other apparel providers that could be outfitting the school in 2026 and beyond. And you may ask the question of why did this matter? Well, why does this matter? Brands go a long way in the world of college sports, particularly when it comes to recruiting. Nike and Jordan are valuable properties. And look, they're not going to be the reason that you go out there and sign the number one class in the nation or anything like that. But you tell a 17-year-old kid he can go play at a Jordan school, that's going to be pretty enticing. And again, you may be an adult sitting there listening to this thinking, how preposterous, who cares what the apparel provider is, just go out there and play the game, regardless of what the uniforms look like or the material on them. But again, when you're talking about 16, 17, 18-year-old kids, that brand matters a lot. And again, if you can tell them that, hey, you're gonna be able to have Jordan brand cleats playing football at Florida or Michigan, that may be enough to sway them. Crazy enough. And recruits have been swayed by a whole lot less. You know what I mean? Like, you hear stories of recruits being swayed by the milkshakes on campus or another amenity, silly things like that. So having these brands does certainly go a long way. And something else I was thinking about, or reading over this yesterday, was what kind of role these brands could play in the NIL space. Now, I was reading an article that Terry told me about from Dan Wetzel of Yahoo Sports about how the current scope of NIL has kind of trended things in a different direction from where the apparel providers played a huge hand, particularly when it comes to college basketball, in helping teams with recruiting and with their classes and everything like that by signing these schools to shoe deals and all that kind of stuff. And we do still see these apparel deals taking place with college athletes. I mean, Malaysia Fulwiley just signed a deal with Steph Curry's brand a couple weeks ago, which is through Under Armour, obviously. So those kind of things still exist. But I think about this from the scope of the eventual destination I feel like we're going to get to when it comes to NIL of these athletes becoming employees of the school, to where there's a line of allowing that money that schools generate from apparel providers to eventually trickle its way down to the athletes. And, again, a $10 million deal, just using the Nike one or the Notre Dame one, for example, is a bit of a drop in the bucket compared to how much money these athletic associations do generate, and that money that theoretically would again begin to trickle down to these student athletes at some point in time. But I think about it from the standpoint of these apparel companies want the best athletes to represent their brand, which again is why they go out and sign these athletes to their individual deals across college and professional sports. But if there's an avenue for this money to eventually go down to the athletes in terms of what you pay to these schools overall, I think there can be a little bit more of a push from the schools to these apparel providers saying, hey, we're attempting, we want to have the best of the best athletes. If you can give us X amount more money on an annual basis, that's going to allow us to pay these guys this much more than what the minimum standard the NCAA or whoever ends up setting for these, guys and girls being athletes. That can push for extra money potentially coming from the Nikes, the Adidas, the Under Armours to trickle down to these athletes, where you can say, hey, if you go to a Nike school, you're going to be able to make X amount more dollars than if you go to an Adidas school and stuff like that. And, I'm talking about it at a surface level here because there's a lot of specifics that would have to take place for those kind of things to end up happening. But it is certainly something that's theoretically possible in this ever-evolving landscape that we know in terms of NIL as it continues to change seemingly on a day-in, day-out basis. And I do think there's a chance that these apparel providers could play a big part in it one day, eventually when these athletes do become the employees of the school that we kind of expect them to be at some point down the road, because it certainly seems like we are definitely, definitely trending in that direction. Give me your thoughts. 803-446-100, Firehouse Subtext line on who you would like to see as the new apparel provider for South Carolina, if you don't want Under Armour to stick around, or maybe you do, and you're certainly entitled to that thought as well. I do have noticed, kind of looking and reading at things, that a lot of South Carolina fans not the biggest fans of Under Armour. I'll dive into a little bit of that coming up, as I did make a post on Gamecock Central's forum last night in reference to this exact thing and got quite a few responses. We'll dive into those coming up. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday here on The Game. Welcome back into the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Wednesday morning. As I mentioned in that last segment, talking about, the potential for South Carolina to maybe have a new apparel provider when their contract with Under Armour ends here in 2 years from now, in the summer of 2026. This is a topic that so many people are passionate about, and something that was actually one of the first things I kind of noticed once I started working here and kind of being ingrained within the South Carolina fan base. Is there are a lot of people passionate about the Under Armour situation, as a lot of them do not like the fact that Under Armour is South Carolina's apparel provider. And it seems to be a lot of people think that, there's not as much care put into South Carolina compared to what, Maryland gets as an Under Armour school, what Notre Dame gets as an Under Armour school. South Carolina just kind of exists as one of those schools in a lot of people's minds. It seems like when it comes to what the apparel provider, ultimately does for them. And as I mentioned, I went on Gamecock Central's forum last night and actually posted to it the Fighting Gamecocks forum about, hey, if there's an opportunity, would you like to see a new apparel provider for South Carolina? And it does seem like, and by the way, if anybody hopped in and, replied to my post out there that's listening, I certainly appreciate that. And it does seem like the overwhelming majority is, wanting South Carolina to go in a different direction. And again, at the end of the day, why does this matter? Well, there is the standpoint of what it does for the teams themselves, for the school itself, in terms of the money that is paid into it. There's also the quality of the products too. And when you're talking about this from a fan standpoint, you want to have good apparel that you can wear to games, wear out in public, all that kind of stuff, and just have for your own. And look, I'm a big fan of Under Armour. I own more Under Armour stuff than Nike stuff, and that's not a slight at Nike. They make very good products. I just find myself buying more Under Armour stuff than anything else. But a lot of people don't feel that way. They think that they don't like the quality of Under Armour's products, and there is a certain, there's a certain status that comes with Nike products, whether you choose to believe that or not, which again goes back to what I said a few minutes ago with, in terms of recruiting, where as silly as it might be when you're thinking about this from the context of being an adult, that, you could potentially sway your college decision in the future of yourself as an athlete based on who's making the uniforms. But when you go to some of these schools, and I think about this, I went to the University of Georgia. For those that listen, you obviously know that. Georgia's a Nike school, and Nike, really goes a long way in the way that they promote their products and their brand of clothing and apparel and shoes and all that kind of stuff. And you see that come up a lot of times when guys are making visits to Georgia and stuff like that, go in the recruiting suite. There's a big Nike presence there. Not to say there isn't one here at South Carolina, but there's just a different kind of, view of Nike, because it's been such the top dog brand for so long, and the shoe associations, things like the Jordan brand and all that kind of stuff, and now Jordan brand getting into being a feature apparel providers for several schools out there, like Florida, like Michigan, like North Carolina, where obviously Michael Jordan went, and those kind of things can sway a 17-year-old kid. If, he thinks that he's going to have the opportunity to wear or, get an inside line on Jordan shoes or Jordan brand clothing or whatever that may be, that can certainly go a long way. And again, I don't know if South Carolina would entertain the Jordan thing, or if Nike would be the best bidder at the table for them. It might be Adidas. You know what I mean? There's only so many apparel providers that are out there. But based on what I'm reading here and what I've kind of seen from the general consensus, it does seem like a lot of people would be more in line with wanting South Carolina to maybe go a different direction with their apparel provider, which, again, when you look at the trends that Under Armour's had, if I had to sit here and bet right now, I would probably say that they would not be renewing at South Carolina, because they've dropped just about every other school with the exception of Notre Dame, who, again, they signed to a very lucrative $10 million per year contract at the end of, towards the end of last year. And for a company that, again, their stock has been falling quite a bit, which is why, the Auburn deal is no longer lucrative for the Tigers anymore, which is why they moved on to Nike. I could see them maybe saying, hey, we only want to be associated with the particular brand of Notre Dame, which again is far and wide one of the most recognizable brands in all of college sports. So even if that is one of your only clients, that still goes a long way in terms of exposure and recognition for your company, to where maybe you don't have South Carolina, maybe you don't have Texas Tech, maybe you don't have Wisconsin or schools like that anymore. So you can kind of singularly focus on Notre Dame, in addition to Maryland, because Robert Plank, the founder of Under Armour, did go to Maryland. So I think they're always going to have a presence with that, with that brand. And I am glad that they finally decided to ditch the god-awful flag helmets and flag features on their uniforms and going back to the traditional script skirt terps on the side of the helmet, something that we knew them well for so long, as things gotten kind of ridiculous in reference to their uniforms over the past couple of years. But again, this is something that's not going to change overnight for South Carolina. It is going to take some time, but that negotiating window is not too far away in reference to what South Carolina is going to do with its apparel provider when the Under Armour deal ends in 2026. 1 hour down, one more hour to go here on the Extra Point with you here on this Wednesday morning. Coach Beamer spoke to the media yesterday as we close in on the end of spring practice. Only a week and a half to go leading up to the spring game, but Coach Beamer talking about several things, including the latest with the quarterback battle and the benefit of having freshmen on campus. We'll dive into all that coming up. Hour number 2 on the way of the Extra Point. It's Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday on the Game. 10 o'clock, welcome in. It's hour number 2 of the Extra Point. Tyler Head with you here on the game. Again, appreciate our guy Ed Bird producing on the other side of the glass for Captain Dave. Today, going to dive into some football conversation about spring ball. I want to hit this real quick, though. This just came across my phone during that break there that NFL announced this morning that opening weekend of NFL play, going to have the Packers and the Eagles playing on Friday in Brazil, Sao Paulo, Brazil, to open up the season. Of course, they'll have the usual Thursday night, opening game that'll feature the Chiefs and somebody, and then you have this game on a Friday of opening weekend as the NFL continues to try and dominate every single day of the calendar. I talked about this the other day with them announcing another Wednesday game, or another Christmas Day game, even though Christmas is on a Wednesday this year, that they've kind of seemingly latched onto that holiday no matter what day of the week it occurs on, because they were probably, looked at the NBA and said, hey, why do they get to have Christmas Day? We can pull better ratings than them, which they certainly have in the past couple of years that they have been, they've been doing that. And, now it seems they're kind of creeping into Friday as well. They had the Black Friday game the day after Thanksgiving this past year. Now they're opening up the season on or having an opening weekend game on Friday down there in Brazil, which, again, Friday is for high school football. I wish they would leave that alone, but if the NFL can squeeze in another day of games and content, they are certainly going to do that. But I thought that was interesting. Packers and Eagles opening up the season down there in Brazil, coming up on Friday, September the 5th. So long way away from September. The 6 days before that, we will have South Carolina opening up their season, taking on Old Dominion right here at Williams-Brice Stadium in Columbia. A lot of questions to be answered between now and then in regards to this team, as so much is new as South Carolina enters this spring. Coach Beamer, as he does every Tuesday during the springtime, spoke to the media about what's going on with this team and what we are figuring out and learning as we, get through these couple weeks of spring practice, culminating with spring game coming up next Saturday, 7 o'clock out there at Williams-Brice Stadium. They did have their first scrimmage of the spring this past Saturday out there at the stadium, which, again, is a true game type setting. You have officials out there. The coaches aren't kind of micromanaging every situation, allowing these guys to kind of go out there and simulate what it's actually going to be like in a, in an actual game type of environment. And one of the big things, from the conversation we heard from Coach Beamer yesterday was the defense being ahead of the offense, which, and he talked about this quite a bit, that's not a surprising thing. This is kind of the time of year where that makes a lot of sense. And I think about it from South Carolina's standpoint, where you have so many new things with this offense that basically just about every single spot, you're kind of figuring out what that pecking order is going to be, what the reps are going to be, and all that kind of stuff across your entire offense. Obviously, you're figuring out your running back situation, particularly after Rocket Sanders, who your main wide receivers are going to be, what the tight end reps are going to look like, who your starting five on the offensive line are going to be. And obviously, the biggest question is what's going to happen at quarterback, top of the list, obviously. Sellers, of course, has the inside track, having been here already a year, but Robbie Ashford does come in with quite a bit of experience. One thing that went into last weekend's scrimmage, a question that was asked quite a bit were the quarterbacks going to be live in this scrimmage, and what kind of benefit could that serve into ultimately making the decision of who your starter is going to be. Go cut number 3 here, Ed. Here is Coach Beamer talking about the quarterbacks going live at the scrimmage on Saturday.
The quarterbacks were live. We didn't do the entire scrimmage live. We ended up getting, we did a little bit of extra 7-on-7 work. I think true scrimmage work, we got around 60 plays, and then some other stuff that was more like 7-on-7 where it was scrimmage, but we weren't tackling. It was more working on the passing game and stuff. So as far as the about a third of the scrimmage, the quarterbacks were live, and that was all of them. Kind of what you thought when they got hit, which they needed to. I don't like them to, but they needed to, just to understand they can't sit back in the pocket all day and not get hit at this level. They got to understand when they have to get rid of the ball and when they're protected or not. So you don't like them getting hit. So that goes back to, the guys around them from a protection standpoint, which they got hit a couple times, so the protection wasn't good enough. And sometimes y'all have heard me say that's the back. Sometimes that's the tight end. Sometimes that's the receivers not doing what they're supposed to do. So being able to get that corrected. But then there were a couple situations where guys scrambled out of there and you saw what they could do with their feet. Lenoris had a run where he scrambled and stepped up in the pocket and ran for an explosive run. Robbie had one where he got out on the perimeter and kind of showed what he can do. So I think we've got some athletic quarterbacks, and they can make plays with their feet, and that's why we went back and forth on whether or not to make them live, and that's why we did. Thought it would be good for the defense to know that being able to finish on the guys and tackle, and then for the quarterbacks to understand the plays they can make with their feet and when to get rid of the ball as well. But it was good for both sides, and both sides liked it without a doubt.
The biggest news coming away from that is nobody got hurt, which was the concern when this conversation came up a week ago. It's, yes, you want to get the best looks out of your quarterbacks, and particularly when you're talking about guys like Sellers and Ashford, where running the ball is going to be a big part of their game and a big part of their offense going into this fall, that, there's something about the two-hand touch or in the grasp or however you want to phrase it, for practice and scrimmage purposes, that doesn't quite give you the best look compared to actual live tackling, where you have the ability to break tackles. You have the ability to let a play develop all the way out and see how it ends, to give you a gauge on where your quarterbacks are in regards to those kind of elements of it. So you just hope they don't get hurt. Now, yes, we are a long way away from the opening day of college football, so even an ankle roll or something like that wouldn't be a huge deal as of right now, because that's something that you would have the ability to heal up from before the season gets here. But freak accidents happen in football, even non-contact ones, where you can tear ACLs and all those kind of things, even with minimal contact. So thankfully, it sounds like nobody got hurt in regards to those quarterbacks going live in the scrimmage on Saturday. And again, it doesn't really seem like anybody's kind of separated themselves at this point in time. I don't expect them to, because, again, we're only a couple weeks into spring practice, and for a guy like Robbie Ashford, still kind of ingraining himself into this culture and this program. So we'll see what kind of push that he's going to make over the course of the summer and camp leading up to the start of the season. Somebody else in that quarterback room, Dante Reno, who, of course, comes in as a true freshman, and is likely not going to be factoring into the starting role necessarily, as, again, that's going to be between Sellers and Ashford, it seems like. Davis Bevel even got some first-team reps, the other week based on the reporting that we saw from Gamecock Central. But it seems likely it's going to be a Sellers and a Robbie Ashford competing for the job at the end of the day. But Dante Reno is expected to be that guy at some point down the line to take over as the quarterback for South Carolina football, and he's one of many freshmen that have had the opportunity to come in spring practice. And Coach Beamer, will go cut number 7 here, Ed, talked about the benefit of having freshmen on campus for spring ball.
Yeah, it's huge. You think about it, we started, I think it was 5 true freshmen last season. Nicholas Harbor, not here for spring practice. Tro, not here for spring practice. Tree was not here for spring practice. I think Judge was, but that's pretty much every freshman you started as a true freshman in this league. They didn't get to go through spring practice. They just started practice in August, and then a month later they're playing in SEC football games in Athens. So it's huge to be able to go through spring ball. We were talking about it yesterday I was with the offensive staff. I mean, you look out there and you got Josiah Thompson and Cam Pringle and Blake Franks, who should still be in high school taking classes at Woodland High School and Dillon High School and Greenville High School. And instead, they're here going through spring practice, but not just going through spring practice. They're going through spring practice having to block Tonka Hemingway and TJ Sanders and Boogie Huntley and DeAndre Jules, guys that are 5 years older than them and have played college football at a high level for a while now. And obviously the moment's not too big for them, but they're going through some growing pains, and they're going to be so much better for it come August because they're going through that right now and not going through it for the first time in August. So they're making progress, and really proud of those guys. You know, we've talked about it in here. It's just so beneficial that of all the scholarship guys that we signed, everyone's here right now except for Matthew Fuller, Jalua Solomon, and Michael Smith. You know, 3 guys, and that's it. Every other freshman's going through spring ball, which is huge for us, being able to practice the way we want to from an organizational standpoint, but then those guys getting that experience in order to be ready to go this season.
It's very huge, and especially in a year like this where there's so much newness, particularly when you talk about the offense, that I'm not necessarily saying that you're going to have a lot of freshmen that you want to start on the offense, but it gives them the opportunity to really show what they have. And, hey, if they're the best possible player at that position, they're going to get the opportunity to start. You know, Dylan Stewart, obviously here on campus and showing out so far through these first couple weeks. All the reports that we've gotten about him have been fantastic, which is what you hope for out of a guy that, you know, comes in as a 5-star. And I can't remember who said this. I think it might have been Sterling Lucas a season ago in reference to guys that come in as true freshmen that do get to participate in spring ball. A lot of coaches view that basically just as valuable as having a season under your belt. Now, there's a difference between obviously playing games and just kind of mainly going through practices and scrimmages, but compared to, as Coach Beamer mentioned there, the guys that don't come in until August or you know, early summer where you're, you know, not having as much of those true kind of practices and being able to run through things in the same amount that you would in a spring, that getting up to speed process can be a little bit tougher. And there's not as much time for development. He talked about a guy like Nick Harper, who we completely understand him wanting to stay in high school, you know, for the length of time to close things out in May and finish up his track career in high school and all that kind of stuff. But the development that he could have had coming in earlier in the spring, you know, maybe could have set him apart when the fall came around. Again, thankfully, most of the guys, with the exception of those couple that he named right there at the end, are here for spring practice now and can get that development, can get that practice under their belt for when the season rolls around. Should any of them get thrust into a starting role, it is not as much of a deer in the headlights type of thing or you know, thrown to the wolves type of deal, as opposed to if you know, didn't come in until later in the summer, like, again, some of those guys that did end up having to factor into the offense in other roles a season ago had with that, you know, that little bit lack of practice time that they would have had coming in to the season. So, again, about another week and a half to spring practice and all that culminating with the spring game coming up next Saturday out there at Williams-Brice Stadium. And then you transition into the, you know, the next portal cycle where you have these these meetings and evaluations with these guys following the spring game and kind of where they're at. And that's going to allow some of those guys that may not like their current position at South Carolina or the opportunity that they think that they might have to go somewhere else and become a starter or a more featured role or more featured player, to hop in the portal and go do that. And likewise, South Carolina has the opportunity to bring in more talent and address some potential areas that they need after spring practice and evaluating the talent that they currently have on the team. So a very important next couple weeks for South Carolina football coming up here as the spring rolls along. I want to jump back into college basketball coming up. Coach Calipari continues to dominate headlines, and he finally issued his apology to Big Blue Nation yesterday on Twitter. We'll let you hear a little bit of that and why maybe he didn't need to do that coming up. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday morning on the game. Welcome back in. Extra Point, Tyler Head with you here on The Game. I want to remind you that the craft beer card is back. You can spend $30 a brewery at 12 craft beer locations. It's $360 value, all yours for only $79. Go online to 1075thegame.com and click on the Sweet Deals tab to purchase the craft beer card. Of course, Monday night we wrapped up the college basketball season with UConn claiming another national championship, back-to-back ones there for Dan Hurley and company. But going into the game and coming away from it, the headline's not really about what's going on with UConn, so much focused on Coach Calipari and what's going on with the University of Kentucky as the news started to trickle out on Sunday night about him moving on to the University of Arkansas, which I think that's very fitting of Coach Calipari to dominate the headlines for a national championship game that he is not even competing in. And yesterday we had the first, I guess, public appearance of Coach Calipari since this news started to break, with him out walking his dog in the Lexington area, looking like something out of a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode more than anything else. And he had no comments to offer, while out in public, but he eventually made his way to Twitter later on in the day and put out a pretty lengthy video, about 3.5, 4 minutes long, kind of issuing his thoughts and kind of saying farewell and I guess apologizing to the University of Kentucky's fan base in totality over the course of a couple of minutes. And I'm not going to play the entire thing for you here, but I do want to play about a 1-minute clip that I think kind of encapsulates the overall message of what Coach Cal was trying to say with this. Here it is, about a minute of Coach Cal's goodbye letter to Big Blue Nation yesterday.
The last few weeks, we've come to realize that this program probably needs to hear another voice, that the university as a whole has to have another voice giving guidance about this program that they hear. And the fans need to hear another voice. We've loved it here, but we think it's time for us to step away and step away completely from the program. There have been opportunities that have been presented to us, and we're discussing them as a family. I love coaching. I love coaching young people. I love this year's team. I loved every day walking in. They've invigorated me. I love the chase for championships. I love bringing the kids together. It's what I do. It's who I am.
Sometimes I wish coaches would just be kind of brutally honest with us. If there was any coach that does not need to, I guess, apologize for departing a school, it's probably going to be Coach Cal, because the dynamic of this relationship that he has with the university in these past couple of years with the fan base is so unique, where I think both sides are walking away pretty satisfied here. Now, again, when you go back to a couple weeks ago, after Kentucky got eliminated once again in the first 2 rounds of the NCAA tournament, this year happened to be in the first round against Oakland, there was a lot of questions on if Kentucky was going to retain him as their head coach. Now, again, he has a notable $33 million buyout that would slow down a lot of schools from wanting to make that move. But again, this is Kentucky, and basketball matters more than anything else. And if they don't think he can get the job done, they would do what they can to maybe move on from him. But all indications seem to be that he was going to come back for another season at Kentucky. Well, then a couple weeks later, Arkansas, who just lost Eric Musselman to the University of Southern California, seemingly is throwing all this money at him. Now his deal with Arkansas has not been finalized. They're still in the final, talks of that negotiation, but it's expected to be somewhere in the neighborhood of about $8 million. But he's also going to get a very lucrative seeming NIL budget to be able to work with to bring in a lot of top talent out there in Arkansas. So, this relationship's been rocky for a while. Because, again, he's not won a national championship in 12 years, has not made any kind of deep run in the NCAA tournament since COVID. And that's not the standard of what you expect out there with Big Blue Nation in Lexington. So the fans have been chanting for a change for a long time. And Coach Cal, again, seeing a life raft seemingly in Arkansas, throwing a boatload of money at him to be able to come out there where the expectations are going to be high, but not quite as lofty as what you have up there in Lexington. I don't see why they wouldn't do that. And reading the reports from Matt Norlander of CBS, it seems that after Arkansas reached out to him about, potentially coming over there, he did meet with some Kentucky officials, and they were like, "Hey, yeah, go. We can't come to an agreement to retain you. Go ahead and go." And I think they were just as thrilled as he was to see this relationship come to an end because, hey, guess what? They don't have to pay that $33 million buyout and then go out and seemingly go get the coach that they want, or a coach to replace Calipari that they think is going to be able to lead them to the success that you would expect out of Kentucky basketball. Now that brings us to an interesting point, I feel like, because the standard that Kentucky basketball is going to be looking for in their next head coach may not necessarily fit what they're going to be able to bring in. When Coach Cal decides to leave Kentucky and go to Arkansas, that turns the eyes to a lot of notable coaches around the country. Dan Hurley, who just won the national championship, who kind of laughed off the thought of him going to Kentucky. Nate Oates, who just took Alabama to the Final Four, put out a statement yesterday that said, hey, guess what? I'm not going anywhere. A lot of coaches are going to use this as leverage to get better contracts and better deals at their respective schools because Kentucky's going to throw a lot of money at whoever they end up bringing in. And there's a lot of coaches on the list that are going to be going after trying to get as their next head basketball coach. The name that seems to be at the top of the list based on the reporting out of Lexington is Scott Drew, who's been at Baylor for pretty much 2 decades now and has built that into a pretty respectable program in college basketball. Just won the national championship a couple seasons ago, and it seems that is who Kentucky is zeroing in on. If I'm Scott Drew, I wouldn't do it. To be honest with you, I got a good gig out there in Waco. I've literally built this program from nothing into a national powerhouse and one of the toughest conferences in all of college basketball on a year in, year out basis. A perennial tournament team that's destined to make a deep run more often than not. And again, won a national championship a couple years ago. And that national championship, by the way, after having been there for 17, 18 years before getting it, that buys you good graces for a long time. He can sit at Baylor and coach for as long as he wants to, and nobody's going to run him off because they have that national championship. You go to Kentucky and you win a national championship in year number 3, well, you go another 4 or 5 years without one or without making a Final Four, people are going to look at you with their hands up in the air like, what the heck, man? Only one national championship in 8 years? That's unacceptable. The standard and the expectations of that fan base and that program are so lofty. If I'm Scott Drew, I'm using this as an opportunity to get more money out of Baylor and to stay right where I'm at. And Kentucky's going to have to go back to the drawing board and get somebody from a mid-major program like they were able to do with Calipari coming over from Memphis all those years ago. If I'm a Power 5 coach at an already established school, I wouldn't go to Kentucky because you're setting yourself up for failure. Because if you're not in the Final Four in 2 or 3 years, they're going to be ready to run you out of town. And again, Coach Calipari had a lot of success over his years there, but these past couple years, it's gone sideways. And again, it's been built on the fact that they have a roster that is routinely very young, comprised of great talent that goes on to be NBA lottery picks and stuff like that. But as we've seen, experience gets you deep runs in the NCAA tournament. And that's not what they were doing out there in Kentucky. And whoever that new coach that would come in, would they want to change up that strategy of maybe focusing less on getting high caliber talent as freshmen and maybe going out there and attacking the portal a little bit more? I don't know. But again, if I'm a Power 5 coach at already good school, I'm using it to leverage more money and staying right where I'm at as opposed to going into that, wood chipper that is Kentucky that'll chew you up and spit you out real quick. Going to talk some racing coming up next, as we do every Wednesday with Jen Jensen from the early game. As the Extra Point rolls along, Tyler Head along with you here on the game.
Finally gets away. Slitting it side around. Byron way out in the front. Likes what he sees in the mirror. Larson trying to steal second from Chase Elliott. Wallace behind him. William Byron comes to the flag and wins the Cookout 400. A 1-2-3 finish for Hendrick Motorsports. 40th anniversary. Look at these people on their feet off of 2.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point Siderhead along with you here on the game. That was the call on Sunday out in Martinsville on Fox Sports. William Byron winning his third race of the young 2024 NASCAR Cup Series season. Joining me, as she always does on Wednesdays, talk a little bit of racing, is Jen Jensen from the early game. And Jen, I want to focus on the positives to start off with. We'll get to the negatives in just a moment. But for William Byron, as I mentioned, third win in just 8 races so far this season as he continues to cultivate what maybe even be a better year than he had a season ago, where he led the series of 6 wins and another win coming at Martinsville in very, very impressive fashion on Sunday.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, he dominated because a lot of people had trouble passing. We'll get into the whole tire discussion. But for him to advance like 10 spots at one point in the race, like he was able to find some grip and make things happen. He was just kind of out of his mind, head and shoulders above everybody else.
And it's a pretty interesting conversation when you talk about William Byron and Hendrick Motorsports as a whole, who was celebrating their 40th anniversary, had a lot of current and former employees on hand, and they had the throwback, the nice ruby red paint schemes for all their cars. They ended up having a 1-2-3 finish with Kyle Larson and Chase Elliott as well. And I think we've all kind of established Kyle Larson as being, driver number 1 at Hendrick Motorsports. And, it really seems like William Byron has kind of taken over that number 2 spot these past couple seasons. While, yes, Chase Elliott does have his championship, has not been in his usual dominant form compared to a couple seasons ago. And now you're looking at William Byron winning 9 races over the course of just the past 2 seasons alone. And right now seems to be the championship favorite for the series as a whole.
Absolutely. And I've been excited to see Chase Elliott doing a little bit better, and listening to him talk a little bit about what he and Alan Gustafson have going on and how they're seeing improvements and stuff. So I would love to see Chase Elliott continue to improve, but it is odd to see that a former champion is really chasing his younger teammate in as far as wins are concerned.
Yeah, and again, they end up with that 1-2-3 finish. Alex Bowman comes away with the top 10 as well. But no surprise, Hendrick Motorsports at easily its best track, 29 wins there when you count what William Byron did on Sunday. Wrapping up what it was a great celebration for Hendrick Motorsports. At the track where it kind of all started for them with Jeff Bodine winning that race all the way back in 1984, and a track that's given them a lot of great history over the years.
Yeah, what an event. And again, when they had all of those employees and their families and everybody going to that, and they had what was something like 1,500 people at that race cheering them on, all wearing the ruby red shirts and something. So just an incredible celebration. And again, well-deserved. I mean, that's not happened, at least not at Martinsville before, to get a 1-2-3 finish for a team.
Now we unfortunately have to focus on the negative side of things, because we once again had our third short track race of the season. Bristol was great. We talked about the tire wear being kind of the anomaly that it was, and we were shooting to a fantastic race. The first 30 laps at Richmond last week, where they were driving on rain tires and were able to slide around and, have a lot of passing opportunities and stuff like that. But since then, the 370-plus laps at Richmond last week and the 400 laps plus, you had going into overtime at Richmond at Martinsville on Sunday, we're back to being the dull short track racing that unfortunately we've known with the next gen car of these past couple of years. The formula is there. We see the answer has something to do with the tires. The unfortunate part is I don't know if NASCAR exactly knows what that right combination is to make the short track racing what we want it to be.
No, especially at Martinsville, it just seemed like they had to drive. I mean, basically they had to almost get to the end of the stage before they really were wearing enough tire. It was just taking that long for the tires to wear, and that does not provide for good racing at all. And I don't know what the answer is. I know this became the short track / road course tire, and they haven't nailed it yet. And I don't know whether it's the case. I've listened to some different podcasts about options. Whether do you try to do something where you set them up with a couple different sets of tires? They did that at the All-Star race like 6 or 7 years ago, where they had the hard tire and a soft tire. Mm-hmm. But the bad thing about that was everybody used them at the same time. So you really didn't get anything better. Everybody was on soft or everybody was on hard. So I don't know what it's going to take for them to master that.
Well, regardless of what it's going to take to get there, we got to get to the point where we have contact back at short tracks. I think that at the end of the day, that's one of the, most glaring differences between how short track racing used to be and what it is now. And talking about podcast, Denny Hamlin mentioned on Actions Detrimental that earlier on this week, he couldn't even get to the back bumper of cars in front of him, no matter how hard he tried, how hard he drove it in the corner, where you don't have that rooting and gouging and moving guys out of the way that we knew in short track racing for so long. And again, that goes back to the tires and the fact that these guys aren't as out of control and on the edge as they used to be at these type of tracks, which again has unfortunately turned what used to be the best racing into this dull display that we've seen over these past couple of weeks and couple of years.
Yeah, you just don't want to see follow the leader on a short track. That's not what you're watching the race for at all.
I never thought I would say, and if I would have said this a couple years ago, I probably would have been smacked in the face for it by fellow NASCAR fans. Wow, I'm really glad we're leaving Martinsville and going to Texas this weekend because I think the racing's going to be better. That's a ridiculous statement to think.
Yeah, it really is. Of course, I've always kind of liked Texas, especially after years ago there was a little bit of reconfiguring, and I think there can be some exciting racing in Texas, but I never would have wanted to leave Martinsville. To me, that was a good race leading into Texas.
Absolutely. Before we get into the Texas conversation, you had the opportunity to be a part of something pretty cool yesterday as we're getting closer and closer to Throwback Weekend coming up at the beginning of May out of Darlington Raceway. Josh Berry and his crew chief Rodney Childers right over at the governor's mansion here in town unveiling their Darlington Throwback.
Yeah, it's great, and the throwback theme is grassroots, so all the cars are going to have schemes about different grassroots drivers and paint schemes. And Rodney Childers, of course, is the crew chief for Josh Berry, and they unveiled the number 54, which was the stock car that Rodney Childers used to race, and he was not even aware of that before, so he got a little bit kind of choked up when he saw that unveiled for the first time, and that was pretty neat. But what an exciting opportunity for Josh, who, as a rookie, is getting to debut his crew chief's car. I just think it was a really neat opportunity to see that, and he's looking forward to the Darlington race. He's had kind of mixed reviews there, depending on whether it was an Xfinity. He didn't run too bad there, but he's looking forward to really diving in and trying to bring that to first place finish this year.
And I can't wait to see that car in person at Darlington here in a couple weeks' time. And I'm a big fan of Rodney Childers. I think he's the best crew chief in the garage area now that Chad Canals has moved over into a different role. Over there at Hendrick Motorsports, and a very cool throwback scheme that Josh Berry is going to be running. Very relevant to the state of South Carolina, by the way, as Rodney Childers in his late model days was winning at a lot of places like Florence, like Myrtle Beach, won a lot of track championships over across the entire state, and very cool to see him get that throwback coming up here in a couple weeks. And I love Throwback Weekend. I love as we start to see these throwbacks come out over the next couple weeks, and that one kind of starting the trend for 2024.
Yeah, it was a great little ceremony, and again, just the emotion that's involved in this, and the uniqueness of that throwback weekend, the different themes that they have, and there's going to be a lot of opportunities to see the different paint schemes. They're going to be doing some things for Cale Yarborough in honor of him, or in memory of him, at the track. So the weekend, the throwback weekend at Darlington is going to be great this year, Mother's Day weekend.
Well, I can't wait for all of us to be out there in a couple weeks' time to take all that in and watch what we know is always going to be exciting racing at the track that's too tough to tame.
Yep, 100%. It's going to be a fun time once again.
Texas coming up this weekend, and again, it's a track thing, be a little bit hit or miss as far as the racing goes. I do think it's going to be better than what we've seen these past couple weekends at short tracks, and hopefully can get us back in the trend of exciting racing that we saw to start the season.
100%. I mean, and the ratings really, considering that they were up against the national championship for women in the basketball tournament, the ratings are really pretty good for Martinsville. So, I'm hoping that we didn't lose any ground by having kind of a race.
Yeah, we'll see what happens this upcoming weekend. Less competition certainly going head-to-head as now the basketball season has ended on the college side of things, and hopefully we were in for a good race this weekend.
Yep, I'm looking forward to it. It's a great track. At least I think it is. So I think there should be some good racing this weekend.
Absolutely. Appreciate it as always, Jen. We'll check in and get with you next week.
Sounds good.
All right, that was Jen Jensen, as always, from the early game, talking racing, as she does with me each and every Wednesday. As we were going to that segment, I did check with Twitter to have some breaking news in regards to Coach Calipari. We'll get to that coming up as we wrap up hour number 2 of the Extra Point here on The Game. Welcome back in, Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you. A few more minutes flying solo here. Then Wes and Chris will jump in with me as they always do for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. We'll dive plenty more into what Coach Beamer had to say to the media yesterday, as well as some news on the recruiting front for the 2025 class that is certainly welcome for South Carolina. Want to remind you as well, coming up on Friday, the halftime show. Myself, I'll be out at TEC Equipment Rental out at 2025 Old Dunbar Road out in Casey, broadcasting from 12 until 3. Come by and see me, and we'll get you set for a great weekend of sports head, including the Masters and a lot of great baseball action, too. So, again, that's Friday out at TEC Equipment Rental, 2025 Old Dunbar Road out there in Casey. I was talking about Coach Calipari a little bit earlier on, and the fact that he had not yet officially signed his deal with Arkansas. Well, lo and behold, as I was talking about that, the news became official earlier on in the hour that Coach Calipari is the official new head basketball coach for the University of Arkansas. He has signed a 5-year contract with salary beginning at $7 million per season. This is per ArkansasRazorbacks.com. There are incentives within his contract that do include a signing bonus and bonuses up to $500,000 each year based on how deep he takes the Arkansas Razorbacks in the NCAA tournament. And again, for a coach that had, been subject to, rightfully so, a lot of criticism for his past couple seasons at Kentucky, this is a place that he can go to where he still should have a lot of success. Because, again, he's obviously very experienced in the SEC, going to be able to bring in a lot of high-caliber talent thanks to NIL and all that kind of stuff out there at Arkansas. But the rabidness and the expectations of the fan base not going to be at the same clip that they were out there in Kentucky. Now, this Arkansas fan base is going to expect a lot out of him. And Eric Musselman obviously did a very good job of making good tournament runs over the past couple years with Arkansas, which helped propel him to getting the Southern Cal job that he left for, last week. But it's one of those things that, man, if you take Arkansas to the Final Four in year number 2 or year number 3, that's going to build you a lot of good grace over a period of time compared to it at Kentucky, where that thing's just kind of expected. You know what I mean? And for an Arkansas program that has not even been to a Final Four since 1995, if Calipari can get them back there within the next couple of years, that will satisfy a lot of people there. Now, obviously, the expectations, national championship and all that kind of stuff, but again, it's not going to be quite the wood chipper and a grind of dealing with that kind of fan base out there in Fayetteville like it has been out there in Lexington. But again, a 5-year, $7 million per year contract being officially signed this morning with Coach Calipari, who again put out his farewell message to Big Blue Nation yesterday out there on Twitter. Now, it is interesting to note that $7 million is less than he was making annually out there at Kentucky. But again, the change of scenery, I'm sure, is worth maybe taking a little bit less. And again, there are incentives based on how far he's able to take the Razorbacks in regards to the NCAA tournament, being out there as their head coach. But interesting dynamic and things shifting around in the SEC with Coach Calipari now heading out to Fayetteville officially this morning, and we'll see what Kentucky ultimately ends up trying to do as far as their head coach. Again, it seems like Scott Drew is at the top of that list. The coach currently out there at Baylor has been there for the past 20-plus years now. And does he end up going there? I don't know. As I said a little bit earlier, I think he's got it made at Baylor. And the fact that he's already won a national championship with them, he can seemingly coach there as long as he wants without, being run out of town anytime soon, as opposed to the Kentucky fan base, which, again, is going to have very lofty expectations to come in and win right away and have sustained success for a long period of time for whoever ends up coming in there and taking over that head coaching role. But that's something we're going to keep an eye on as this develops. And I imagine they're going to have a hire relatively quickly, very similarly to when Nick Saban decided to retire at Alabama a couple months ago now, that coaching search was over and done with in just a couple days' time. And we'll see how quickly Kentucky takes for ultimately bringing in a new head coach out there in Lexington. But we'll see as a lot of high-level coaches being linked to the job steadily start to turn it down. Dan Hurley, Nate Oates, guys like that. We've not heard anything from Scott Drew, as, again, he kind of seems to be the top candidate as of right now. We'll see what they ultimately decide to do as far as the next head basketball coach at the University of Kentucky. That'll do it for today's edition of The Extra Point. Coming up next, as always, it is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. As I mentioned, Coach Beamer yesterday talking to the media, talking about a number of things, as we got good insight into the first practice of the springtime. We'll dive into some of that, as well as him talking about development of different areas on this team and how things are coming along as we are getting closer and closer to the end of spring practice and the spring game coming up at the end of next week. So we'll dive into all that coming up in the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs with Wes and Chris. Coming up next, all right here on The Game.